Great apologies, I'm not there directly with you in Marrakesh. I hope you're having a fantastic time. I'm just going to give 5 or 6 minutes of scene setting as to why this is so very important to business and why the Consumer Goods Forum, which I'm representing today, has taken this so seriously. The Consumer Goods Forum represents some of the world's biggest food, drink and consumer goods companies, turning over about $3 trillion a year between us, about 10% of the global market for consumer goods. Now, in 2010, we recognised that deforestation was a big issue that affected our entire industry, deep in our supply chains for palm oil, for soy, for beef, paper and pulp. Deforestation was happening. We had a responsibility to tackle that and put it right. And we came up with a far-reaching resolution that our members, the Consumer Goods Forum companies, some of the world's biggest, Pepsi, Coca-Cola, Nestle, Unilever, Walmart, Tesco's, would tackle that deforestation and eradicate it from our supply chains by 2020. And we've made good progress. Over the last 5, 6, 7 years, we've implemented standards, we've certified a lot of our supply chains, to the extent that about 80% of the world's globally traded palm oil now meets some kind of deforestation standard, which is great progress. But, and there's always a but, no business can do this alone. Marks and Spencer is a small retailer. We sell about 800 different food products containing palm oil, 2,000 tons of palm oil. It's about 1.5 tons or 2 tons per product. It's tiny. We sell 1,500 different products containing wood. To trace every single product through every supply chain, every factory, every farm, every forest is difficult. And we realized that we needed a different approach to managing forests in our supply chains than just individually certifying. And that's why we helped form the Tropical Forest Alliance, TFA. And they've done a brilliant job at bringing together funding governments, the US, the British, the Dutch, the Norwegians, with countries with forests that need to be kept standing, with business, with civil society and indigenous peoples as well. And the TFA has been a great assistant in the last couple of years at driving us further and beyond certification. But there's another limit as well. Even with that, we recognise that we need such strong support on the ground. We need policy, we need regulation in the field, in the forest, that enables us to certify and work with our supply chains, but knowing that the whole landscape in that area is being well looked after. So about a year ago, COP-21 back there in Paris, those great days, Marks and Spencer and Unilever co-chaired the CGF sustainability work, committed to explore this jurisdictional approach to a greater level. We'd really understand it. And that's what we've done over the last 8 months. Now, let me do 3 things for you in the next few minutes. Let me explain what we've done, what we've learned, and what we're going to do in 2017 as well. And back then, when we launched the initiative back in Paris, we said we're going to look at 6 criteria that described what we thought was a good jurisdictional approach. Everything from having strong political support, stakeholder engagement, strong monitoring of the baseline of forests, strong regulation on the ground as well. So we came up with these principles that we would explore. Now, what we've done over the last 8, 9 months with Chris and the US State Department, we've convened an expert group of people to really test that approach. And they've done a great job. They've worked out that this approach does have the potential to work, but what they've done is they've helped us develop specific, detailed questions about how you can really understand whether a jurisdiction is really stepping up to the mark on this. It's very easy for us to be misled, for greenwash to happen. But these questions are really helping us understand the reality of a good jurisdictional approach. They've also helped us then create a process by which we assess jurisdictions to work out which ones are actually delivering these criteria. They've helped us work out a baseline to start to work out which jurisdictions in the world currently meet those criteria, of which there are a couple, and also those that are moving towards it as well. So again, we can pass that information to the sourcing teams of big businesses around the world so they can start to understand whereabouts in the world they should be sourcing from. So that's been great for us as well. And they're helping us with the communication strategy as well, bringing it to life, explaining to people, explaining to sourcing departments of big business about the positive difference we can make by working on a jurisdictional approach. So that's what we've done over the last 8, 9 months, and say thank you very much to everybody who's been involved. We couldn't have done it without you. So let me move on to the second thing. What have we learned? We've learned very, very clearly, literally no business can certify and protect forests on its own. We suspected it, it's been absolutely proven. All you do is create a little green oasis in an area of deforestation and wasteland. What was the point of that? We have to have this joined up approach across the whole landscape that joins together the efforts of many different individual businesses, the work of civil society, of government, of local farmers, and other community groups as well. We've learned that there is a significant challenge in terms of farming productivity. So we've got out there some world-class farmers producing to very high standards who don't need to deforest more. They don't need more land. They've got a very good business. But too many farmers are producing to poor standards and are constantly hungry for more land. They chase the forest, they cut it down because they produce so unproductively on the land that they've got. We need greater extension support. And again, no business on its own can do that efficiently. We need a landscape approach offering that extension service. Thirdly, we've learned about the importance of society and communities. As much as we can work hard to make sure that people are looked after in our specific supply chains, we have to work with local governments, local jurisdictions to make sure the outcomes of that forest and that production in that forest are working for everybody. Where communities are committed to keeping forests standing, they stay standing as well. So we have to make sure that there is a social legitimacy to what we do. We've also learned that there's success out there. This is not just a theory. And I think we've seen it in West Kalimantan, we've seen it in Sumatra. We've also seen it in really interesting conversations with the Colombian government, how individual countries and jurisdictions are starting to take this approach seriously. So again, not just a theory and a reality. And again, I come back to what I said about the Tropical Forest Alliance, the TFA. Again, how they're creating the practical partnerships for us out there in supply chains to drive change. So that's what we've learned over the last few months of hard work. Now, let me just finish off by saying what we'll do in 2017. And let me just talk about three things. Firstly, we're going to scale out the tools that we've developed to help sourcing teams in big businesses to procure in the right way. These are early days. This is very new approach for big businesses. We have to tread carefully. We have to take sourcing teams with us. But we now have some tools that we can work with them and explain what's going on. Secondly, that partnership with the TFA, we're going to drive it down another level in supply chain. Not just the big brands, the manufacturers, the retailers, but our suppliers, the big commodity producers as well. They need to be brought into this approach. And then thirdly, we're going to broaden beyond the consumer goods forum and draw in a wider range of sources of raw materials from forests, the food service companies in particular, and get them thinking and working this direction. So that summarises what we've done. As I say, I'd like to reiterate our support to both the US State Department, that group of experts, and the TFA for getting us so far. It's early days, but we think we've made good progress. Keeping forests standing has to be at the very heart of a low carbon world. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We were really sorry Mike couldn't join us here in person, but Marks & Spencer and Unilever have been doing an incredible amount of work since COP-21, along with a much broader group. And I wanted to be able to take the time standing here in person to go into a little bit more detail about some of the work that Mike talked about. Before I do, though, I want to take a step back and reflect on why we thought this was important to get involved in. This was something that we've had a lot of experience watching companies who had made commitments to remove deforestation from their supply chains, reduce deforestation from their supply chains, source more sustainably, and are making huge efforts to do so in any number of ways. But it's difficult, and it's challenging, and it's expensive, and it's very hard to do at scale. These were real efforts, and there's a real commitment there. At the same time, you have governments who have been working for years and years to put in place large-scale programs to protect forests and to reduce emissions. These are also efforts that are challenging, they're long-term, they involve a number of different stakeholders. They're underway, but they're under-resourced, they need support, and they need recognition. These programs, REDD+, Sustainable Landscapes programs, are working on some of the more challenging aspects: governance, infrastructure, monitoring, capacity. The companies have the core business. They move millions and billions of dollars each year in terms of commodity sourcing. We thought it made sense to bring together the companies that wanted to source in the right way with their core business and the governments that were doing the right thing and have some recognition from climate finance and other financing, but need core businesses to flow in because they're doing the right thing. And it seemed that there was an opportunity now that both of these processes are somewhat mature to bring them together and to think about where we have opportunities for synergy. So that's why we got involved. There's been a number of people working on this, and I think those of you in the room have a fact sheet. You'll see we pulled together a bit of a working group, or what we've called a brain trust. We pulled together some of the smartest minds in the business. It's an open group for any other smart minds who want to contribute. But it's been, as Mike said, a full year of work to try and move forward this approach a little bit and help the companies think about how they actually advance, how they actually operationalize some of the work that they announced last year in Paris. So with that being said, there you'll see Mike's former boss sitting on stage with a number of other people last year at COP-21. That probably looks familiar. I won't go into the details, but as Mike said, Unilever and Marks & Spencer, as co-chairs of the Consumer Goods Forum, committed to, with our companies, exploring approaches to prioritize commodity sourcing in jurisdictions that put in place essentially successful forest and climate programs, successful REDD+ programs. And again, as Mike said, there were 6 criteria there that were laid out. I won't read all of these, you have them in front of you, but they go through what is a good program. You have strategies, you have a baseline, you have a monitoring system, you respect social and environmental safeguards, they have ownership by governments, engagement by stakeholders, right? And they're in a country with an ambitious commitment to action. So bringing together these two things, the approach to commodity sourcing and the successful forest protection efforts, has a number of benefits that we wanted to figure out how to capitalize on. It helps put companies on a pathway to zero deforestation. It's not a commitment, or it's not a certification of zero deforestation by any means, but it's a way to move towards meeting these commitments. It's a way to bring in additional incentives to jurisdictions that are doing the right thing, sourcing, real business, money coming in for operations on the ground because of the good work that governments and stakeholders are doing to protect their forests and reduce emissions. It recognizes results achieved at scale. This is jurisdictional, so country scale or subnational in scale. And it builds on existing partnerships. This is not starting new. This is working on programs that are underway, partnerships that are underway, efforts by a number of stakeholders. As I said, we've been very careful, and I think it's worth stressing, this is not a new certification. This is not a new standard. This is not a guarantee of zero deforestation by any means. But this is a way to begin to think about where are things going well, how do we know, how do we monitor that, how do we make it transparent, and where are good places to do business. So as I said, a group of independent experts came together to begin to think about how this could actually be done. We focused on 3 different areas. One, as Mike said, is the process for how you would assess jurisdictional programs against the criteria that were laid out at COP-21. And those 6 criteria were fairly high level, so we ultimately decided that you needed to disaggregate them a bit further, and we'll talk about that. A second question was, how do you then put this information in front of procurement teams and sourcing teams? How do you get the people who buy to know where they should be looking? So we needed some type of a database or website to make this easily accessible. And then we needed a way to communicate this to companies and jurisdictions and other stakeholders. So one of the first things we started to do was to disaggregate each of the criteria. And just as one example, first criterion is a strategy for how to reduce emissions from forests and other lands while increasing agricultural productivity. There seem to be a lot of airplanes here. We thought about what this actually meant in practice. And we disaggregated this down to 3 additional questions. These are all available online, so don't feel the need to copy all of them down at this point. But the idea was, what does that actually mean? What does a good strategy look like? What do we care about? If a company were trying to assess if a program were doing well, what would they want to know? And these were the type of questions we looked at. I will say that we have noted that this is an iterative approach. This is the first time we've done something like this, so this is the first version. These will improve over time as we learn and as we hone in on how to do this well. We established also a stoplight system. We figured that you needed a way to actually mark how programs were doing against the criteria and the questions. So a green, the criteria or the question was fully met, was fully consistent. A yellow, it's underway, it's quite close. Maybe there's a few things that are a little bit different. Or an orange, maybe there's more of a gap. Maybe it's not quite there. Maybe this is an area where more work needs to be done. And as we thought about how this approach had been shaped, the criteria were things that really did need to be met, that really needed to be green. It's hard to have a good program without a strategy, without a functional monitoring system, without respecting safeguards. But there were some sub-questions that might not be green, that might be yellow or orange. And those might be areas where you need to do a bit more work or where you might need to pay a bit more attention as you go on. As we started to think about how to assess the programs, we realized that there were sort of 3 broad sets of programs, if you will. And these don't reflect quality in any means, but they affect how programs have been developed. So some programs are working in initiatives that have global standards for jurisdictional programs, if you will. And we did some work to identify as many out there as we could, and we found 2 to date. So the FCPF, Forest Carbon Partnership Facilities, Carbon Funds Methodological Framework, and James will talk a bit more about this, and the Verified Carbon Standards Jurisdictional and Nested REDD Framework, and we've got David and Naomi and a few others in the audience who can talk about that. So that was one set of programs. We thought very early that it would make sense to assess these standards against the criteria, because then you would know that any jurisdictional program that met the standard was also consistent with the criteria, and that gives you a much more efficient way to begin to recognize programs themselves. A second set of programs are those working through major partnerships, and there's any number of these, from REDD Early Movers to the Governor's Climate and Forest Fund to some of the major bilateral partnerships. These may be equally good in quality, but there's not a single global standard. So you would actually assess each program on a case-by-case basis. But there's a lot of access to these programs, there's a lot of contact information, there's a lot of documentation, so it's fairly easy to know who to reach out to and who to talk to. A third set of programs might be working independently of major partnerships. Again, they might be equally good in quality, but you may not know as easily who to talk to or where to find information, so it might take a bit more work to do the outreach on these. So we thought that dividing these into 3 sets of programs in terms of process might be helpful. As I said, we decided to start by assessing the global standards. This meant that we looked at each of the standards against the criteria and thought about, would you know based on the standard that a program which had been accepted or approved would meet the criteria? So for example, does the standard require a strategy that's similar to the criteria that were laid out? If the standard has a very similar requirement, then any program accepted by the standard would also meet that criteria. So we looked at the Forest Carbon Partnership Facility, we looked at the Verified Carbon Standards JNR framework, and we had a group of experts who went through these in great detail. We reached out to both of the standards, who were quite kind enough to provide us with a lot of information, with feedback, to clarify, to provide us with additional documentation. And at the end of this, we came up with an assessment of each standard individually. The good news is, you'll be happy to hear, both standards we found were actually consistent with the criteria 1 through 5. Not with all the sub-questions. There were some sub-questions which were yellow or orange for each one, but with each of the high-level criteria and with most of the questions underneath that. And this information is all available on the website that you've got on your sheet as well. Each one had been developed before COP-21, so there weren't explicit references to INDCs or NDCs. So we did say that each of the programs, you would have to go back in and make sure that the country had an INDC or an NDC. That obviously is pretty simple to do. The second thing that we did, as I said, was try to figure out how to make this information accessible to procurement managers. If I were someone who was looking to buy cocoa or palm oil or pulp for my packaging, where would I turn? How would I know where my priorities should be? So we wanted a website that was accessible to procurement managers, that was easy to use, but we also wanted a website that put information on the jurisdictional programs at the hands of anyone who is interested in the program. So we've had a whole team who's been looking at how to get this information up on the website. We've been talking to procurement teams from different companies about what they want to know, what type of information do they look for when they make sourcing decisions, what contact information do they need, and we've built a database and a website around this. You see it up on the screen. Again, you have it on your paper. I will say with a caveat, this is a very beta version. It's a very initial version. It will improve over time. And we're looking how to build it into a much more functional and long-term database that is used by many others. But this gives you easy access to information to start. That's a screenshot. It's up. So there's a couple next steps that I want to talk about. And Mike mentioned some of the work that the companies themselves will be doing in 2017. Just to reflect on this, as I mentioned, when we started the assessment of the global standards, one of the things we wanted to do was refine the process. We've never done this before. We learned a lot in going through this the first time. So we will take this back now and reflect on the process itself, on whether the wording for some criteria needs to be refined, where it wasn't as clear as we thought it was, or where the questions need to be refined. And we'll use that to adjust the process moving forward. Then we'll be in a very good place to begin to assess individual jurisdictional programs. At the same time, the standards themselves are already approving programs, so you've got jurisdictional programs coming in now under the 2 recognized standards. And the DRC and Costa Rica were the first 2 that have already been accepted and are working towards ERPA, or contract signature, under the FCPF Carbon Fund. VCS will have a number coming online. So as we refine this, you'll still see a couple of jurisdictional programs moving forward and being recognized. And then that information will go up on the website as each one is available. And finally, we want to continue outreach to other stakeholders, jurisdictions, and to companies. So if you're interested in this approach, if there's company representatives who want to know how they might apply it, if there are people who want to contribute to some of the thinking around this, and especially if there's jurisdictions who are working on programs and want to begin to think about how this might be useful, feel free to reach out. I'll leave it at that, and we have time for question and answers at the end, where I'll be happy to talk more. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Victor Kabengele. I'm the National REDD Coordinator for DRC. First of all, I would like to request your indulgence because English is not my mother tongue, so I will try, and it's not going to be as good as Chris English. So, okay. Anyway, I would like to share with you how in DRC a jurisdictional program is underway and is engaging logging companies to comply with some requirements to be in order to fit in the program and help the jurisdictional program to go to move in the right direction. DRC, as you know, is a huge country, 253 million hectares of superficie, and then 155 million hectares of forest, in which you got 115 million hectares of humid forest. And it represents at least 50% of the total of African forest and 60% of Central African basin forest in the world. And historical deforestation is very low, but as you know, the country is very huge, and every year we lose at least 500 hectares of forest, which is very, very huge for the country, and we have to make sure that, we have to make sure that we do everything to reduce this deforestation in the country. For the forest, about 10% of the forest is designated for the logging in the country, which is not too big because the country is very huge. And only 10 companies are doing logging concession, which makes 90% of the export timber. But in DRC, as you're going to see, sustainable forest management is a pillar of our REDD Plus strategy. And in the Maindombe program, which we are a jurisdictional program which is underway, we're going to start probably in next year, is a province size of 12 million hectares, in which you got 10 million hectares of forest. And from which you got 9 million of primary forest. Well, estimating for the carbon ton to be, let's say, work on it, 29 million CO2 emission reduction, which we have to deal with the carbon forest fund from the World Bank for a deal which can bring at least $60 million from the ERPA we're going to sign next year. And in the program, we have more than 20 partners are working in the program, including the logging concessions. The mine concessions, you got 20% of the whole area is attributed to the forest concessions. You got 20 concessions in the area, only 11 are operating. And from these operating concession, only 3 are in order with the law. That means that have a management plan in place. And the problem, the issue of illegal logging is very, very problematic in the area. And then we have to work on it to make sure that everything is in order. That is just a map showing the different concession, and the REDD project is in the area. You got 3 REDD projects working in the area. And here, what are the challenges we got in the Mine Domain jurisdictional program to bring all the logging concession in the program? The first important challenge is illegal activities. The illegal activities pose a significant risk to the program, both in terms of unplanned emission and also in terms of how the program can satisfy the safeguard and social environmental safeguard. Also, how we can ensure that the industrial logging companies are not putting in jeopardy the environmental and social integrity of the REDD program. You must do everything that these companies are working in the same direction to make sure that the emission reduction we're going to get from as a result of the program is real. And also how we can incentivize these logging companies to take an active role in the REDD. That is the main challenges we got in the program, to bring the logging companies on board. And what we put to make sure that these companies are with us, let's say we put approach of complying to the some standard. And the objective of this program is, first of all, to design a sample framework to assess how logging companies' performance and compliance are to the sustainable management and REDD objective, to make sure that what we got as a national standard, as what we got at REDD plus standard, and also the safeguard are the company are complying to that. And the second objective is how can we incentivize the compliance in the program area by supporting activities doing by logging companies. A lot of them have no money to be in compliance, and how can we help them to comply to the standards? That is just how the compliance standard we have to make sure. So we have to make sure that the company has a legal entity conform to the law. We have to make sure that the company comply to the sustainable forest management criteria, and also to the national environment and social safeguard, to make sure that everything is in order. Like we say, ensure that the logging companies in Mine Dombé do not jeopardize the credibility and objective of the REDD program as a whole. That is just an indication of the annual checks. And secondly, we have to use REDD Plus to incentivize many company compliance, notably by giving them support on the AirPower we're going to sign with the bank, we are going to allocate 1.5 million to support enabling measures for sustainable forest management for these companies. And secondly, this company going to take profit of the result-based payment for the conservation and reduce impact logging. So our let's say, motto with this company is, okay, you do business with us in the jurisdictional area, not only you're gonna profit for your business as usual, but you're gonna take also a revenue from the conservation and reduce impact logging if you come with us in the program. So the benefit is double and is a win-win business, if I can say like that. Here, just to indicate some barriers and opportunity for the private sector to be engaged, to be committed to the REDD Plus in DRC. First of all, the barriers. A lot of barriers like we're gonna see, lack of understanding of the REDD opportunities. REDD is a new and innovative, let's say, business, and a lot of people doesn't understand yet what is REDD. Misunderstanding of government maybe law and tax, a lot of barrier in terms of tax for the collectivity from the local government and national at the national level also. Limited financial attractiveness. Doing business in the sector, forest sector, is not easy in DRC because it's not supported by the banking system, and which is not easy in fact. And also another barrier is short-term program funding, and the program usually is for 5 years. For example, the Maïndomé program is for 5 years, which is not enough for conservation activities, for example, for the forest, let's say for forest activities. Today, if you plant a tree, like I will just give an example, you are doing agroforestry business, you plant acacia. Acacia, to get to maturity, it's going to take at least 7 years or more. So the program is going to last for 5 years, which is not enough to get the result you are intending to have. It's the same for the conservation activities. It's going to take you maybe 25 years. So there is no compatibility, if I can say, between the time of the period of time of the program itself and the activities the program is intend to do. But there are also opportunities, and opportunities is the reputational aspect of the logging company to be in business with us in the jurisdictional program, because as you know, the program itself has to comply to FCPF methodological framework, which is not in contradiction with the VCS methodology as well. So if the logging company is doing business with us in the context of the Maïndomé program, it is sure that it got all the benefits a company can get by doing, let's say, the forest business according to the requirements. And other benefits is economic. I can say, like we say here, how can the company prioritize their sourcing with company in DRC, and when they come, I just give an example, in Unilever, if it comes to DRC, you're gonna first look for the company who are doing business in Maïndomé program, because this company must comply to the requirements for the jurisdictional program. So that is a benefit this company gonna take profit of. And other opportunity is support to increase compliance and the access market. Like I say, this company doing business in the Mind-Over program can take advantage when it comes to the prioritizing sourcing from company overseas. And also improvement on the business climate. The problem for us is to put in place a good governance to make sure that all the, what I can say, the requirements on the government are met, and the company doing business with us have to comply to the governance, good governance. They have to make sure that all the rights for communities are respected. So all these kind of requirements, like I saw the criteria Chris was talking about, I have to be satisfied in the program. And that is the support we gave to the companies, technical support also. And to conclude, just to say that the Mind-Over program is an opportunity to improve the forest governance through REDD plus incentives, by giving a testing in an innovative approach to help the logging company to comply with the law through REDD benefits, REDD plus benefit and the reputational gains. Also, the company have, like I say in the Mind-Over program, over the 11 companies, 3 have declared the interest to be in the program formally. And we're going to support the activities for the other 8 to make sure that they can comply with the requirements from next year in order for us to sign the ERPA contract. Also, a potential to be scaled. What we are doing in Mind-Over is to be, let's say, duplicate in other parts of DRC. DRC is a huge country, and we have 26 provinces. We hope that if Mind-Over program succeed, it can be duplicated in other parts of the country. Also, an opportunity to incentivize the local businesses. Like I say, showing the local businesses which are in the Mind-Over program that they will be prioritized by the buying company. Like I say, Unilever can make this company in his top list if it comes to buy things in DRC or soil or soja, or because we're working also with the farmers. So they're going to be on the top list of these overseas companies. The businesses are in a win-win approach. Like I say, they're doing their business as usual, and they gain also in the carbon market. Also getting money in the main sector, like I said, also in the carbon sector, and crucial stake for the businesses for the success of the REDD program as a whole. It means that all actors involved in the Mind-Over program have only one vision, is to make the program to be a success in order for them, all of them, to take profit of that. I think that is all what I can say for now. Thank you very much.
Congratulations to you, the United States. Can you hear me, or shall I stand? I'll ask them. Thanks. Good afternoon, everybody, and I'm sure we're coming towards the end of a long day, so let me try and be brief. I think this is a really great initiative, and I'd like to congratulate the United States government and the other partners that have been involved in this for completing these milestones that have been undertaken in a relatively short period of time since Paris. And I think this brings together two really important and exciting parts about forest conservation, and that's linking the eradication of deforestation from supply chains with the alleviation of rural poverty, and using both climate finance and private sector participation to enable that to happen. So we at the World Bank have been delighted to have been part of this endeavour. It's completely consistent with our Forest Action Plan and Climate Change Action Plan. And we're really very encouraged to hear of the great steps that you've made in the DRC to capitalise on the accomplishments of REDD Plus governments and their stakeholders to implement REDD Plus in this kind of comprehensive and scaled up approach. I think this is a really important step in taking forward the commitments by some of the private sector pioneers, McDonald's, and we heard from Mike Berry at Marks and Spencer's, in really ensuring that their business practices and their sourcing mandates towards sustainable production incorporate the kind of forestry and biodiversity conservation that's going to be critical to these kind of agricultural practices. And this provides a real opportunity for the private sector to engage in these activities in a way that supports climate change mitigation, enables sustainable resource management, but also is very respectful of the rights of local and forest communities and gives them the chance to lock into pathways of economic growth. So we see tremendous value in diversifying the REDD Plus financing here. I think it's probably going to be absolutely necessary. I think if you look at the size of the supply chain, the work that the Tropical Forest Alliance has undertaken suggests that it's about $200 billion per year. And just to put that in perspective, the Germans, Norwegians and the UK in Paris committed $5 billion of results-based financing by 2020. So this results-based financing is really unlocking enormous amounts of money from the supply chain, and it ensures that we do that in a sustainable and viable way. And you know, we expect the end results that come from this to be give us a series of options for progressive companies to source their ingredients and products from producers who can verify adherence to high climate, environmental and social standards that are enshrined in initiatives like the Forest Carbon Partnership Facility and the VCS. And I think, as Mike indicated, companies alone can't do that sort of thing. They need this systemic approach that enables them to rely on the products that they're sourcing being appropriately sustainable. So the Forest Carbon Partnership Facility, as the name suggests, has worked in partnership with many others in a real commitment to make this happen. And part of this way of working involves the methodological framework. It becomes an international standard that enables others to implement and demonstrate and verify the successful REDD Plus activities. And we're really pleased that these methods have been adopted and accepted more widely, and I think that establishes a gold standard for what these can be. And clearly, adopting these also in the interest of the countries, it enables them to ensure that they have an approach that supports green growth, and it also raises awareness of the commodities that are produced in these jurisdictions with a commitment to sustainable production. And so that can then attract new investment that's consistent with climate change and the Sustainable Development Goals. So I think there's a really important question for all of us here as we listen to these stories and we hear about what's going on, which is how can we support companies to raise the bar step by step, and at the same time to provide the early incentives for countries that have demonstrated a commitment to REDD+. To be a real, genuine public-private partnership that makes forest conservation and sustainable land management a really clear priority. So as we sort of reflect on that question, I think it's worth us all thinking about the commitments that we need to make and challenge ourselves to support this in whatever way we can by recognizing and incentivizing the kind of change that needs to happen to realize our goals and objectives here. And we see this as not just a supply chain initiative, but also a local community initiative, and one that enables forest communities to alleviate poverty and to share more in prosperous growth through sustainable rural development. And we think this kind of shifting of sourcing practices is a real win-win for all parties as we come together and we design the programs that enable companies to participate in these activities. So there's a whole series of benefits that come out of this. We think there's an enormous payoff to be had, but we really need to continue this dialogue to ensure that we build the kind of land use planning, the landscape-based approach, and the stakeholder engagement that's going to turn this kind of policy into practice on the ground. And we can really enable forest conservation to be a smart business decision and a sustainable success story. So thank you very much indeed for listening. Thank you for partnering with us and so many other organizations around this, and we rely on your support and help as we continue to implement these ambitious plans. Thank you very much.
And now we'll take some questions for our panel. So if you raise your hand, I will come to you, and please feel free to ask a question. So is there any questions out there? Please introduce yourself too.
Thank you. My name is Joaquim Makwakwa from Mozambique. I'm working at the Ministry of Land, Environment, and Rural Development. Actually, I would like to congratulate the speakers. Actually, they brought here a very interesting point around the issue of forest and REDD. So actually, my concern actually is about the intervention of the first two speakers when they talked about the increasing the agriculture productivity. So, well, actually, I'd like to know if the contract farming without a fixed price, let's say from Unilever or Max Spencer's, will buy the commodity at fixed price or volume, or is it written in a contract to affect how long, or are they going to use the GMO used for the contract farming? Or as long as I know, for example, I heard from DRC that, okay, they may have a contract with a Unilever, for example, to buy some their production. And then I'd like to know how they think about increasing their productivity for those farmers in order to sell for Unilever. And then my last question is how long or how to control the negative impact on the ecosystem by the impact, and is there any health insurance for farmers and families? Thank you.
Mike, do you want to start or shall I?
Yes, I will start, and that was such a good question. Thank you for asking it, sir. And just to be very clear, we're looking now at very different ways that we buy raw materials. A commodity in Africa is a very long way from a shop in London. So we have to work back through several stages in our supply chain to change how we do things. Now, the concept of giving long-term contracts to farmers, it's something we do in the UK with our farming base here. If we're buying beef or fruit or vegetables, we do that, and it's the basis of our business. For commodities, it's not something that we've entered into before, but we know that we need to explore these very different ways of working, particularly with smallholders around the world. So you've set us a good challenge. I know that our food sourcing team are working on it. I said a moment ago that we only use 2,000 tons of palm oil in 800 different products. So we've got lots to do there. Sorry, a little bit of noise going past the office. But we are very, very clearly working on that. The other thing I would just say very quickly is what we're doing in Kenya. We've been working in Kenya now for 30 or 40 years with suppliers to produce beans for us, produce flowers for us. And they have been working with extension service funded by the supplier to us, working around on motorbikes, going around thousands of smallholders, helping them improve how they produce beans. So we've seen models by which this works in the UK. We've seen models by which it works in Africa. We now need to bring that to life in terms of working for commodities in Africa as well. But it's a really good challenge and something that we accept from you.
And I'll just add, Joachim. Okay, I'll just add a few things to what Mike said. I think the questions are very good ones. And as we've recognized, this is a complex challenge. This approach will not solve all problems. It is one additional incentive for places that are trying to do the right thing. So it won't solve all problems. It also doesn't replace ongoing programs, either government programs or programs by the companies or programs by partners like mine or programs like NGOs. So there is a lot of work that needs to continue to be done to build capacity, to build productivity, to make sure that ecosystems are protected. One of the key things, though, I think, is doing this within the framework of a broader program. And as you well know, because Mozambique is working to implement a really interesting jurisdictional program, there is an approach to ensuring that the safeguards respect the social issues that are wrapped up in there, and that there's an ecosystem lens put on the work that's being done. As you well know, there's a lot of effort on the policy, on the governance, on the land use, on the capacity building. So this is one additional incentive, but it doesn't replace anything else that's being done, and it doesn't solve all problems by any means.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions? All right here in the front, and then I'll get over there.
Thank you for the excellent presentation. I would like to pose a question to the victors. The excellent presentation, but how to figure out you have the ER program for 5 years, how to make the long-term sustainable program to ensure that what you aim for is will last in the long term. You know, you have the contract with the World Bank on the ER program, right? Yeah. When the program finish, how you can run your project in that you will fit for your purpose in the long term, how you plan for that?
Okay. Look, normally the program itself is for a long period of time. It's not 5 years. It goes from 2017 to 2030, the first period of time. So for the 5 years, we're going to work with the World Bank. We're going to put in place what we call a sharing plan, which is going to help us to make that every actors who is involved in the program can be retributed, if I can say, proportionally to its effort to get carbon credit to be sold on the market. And a part of this benefit sharing going to be reinvested in the program to make itself running after the 5 years. So it's a long-term program. It's not just for 5 years. The 5 years is like a pilot, if I can say, a pilot period of implementation.
All right, we have time for 2 quick questions, so let's get right to the point. Thank you.
First, thank you all for the presentation, and my question is to Chris. I'm Monique from the Ministry of the Environment of Brazil. Considering the Warsaw Framework for REDD+, define rules and procedures to REDD+ under UNFCCC, and also with lots of countries passing through MRV process under this framework, would you consider use the Warsaw Framework for REDD+ as a criteria to find new partners at national and subnational levels?
It's an excellent question.
Before we answer, let's get both questions at the same time.
I can answer that in about 20 seconds.
All right,
actually.
go ahead then.
I was going to say, it's a really excellent question, and if you look on the website, the actual overarching criteria is consistency with the UNFCCC framework, so that very much is the approach that was taken from the beginning.
Thank you. Thomas Ambres from the EU REDD facility. Thank you very much for this very interesting discussion. My question is, what use do you foresee for the actual performance in terms of reduced deforestation? In the FCPF methodological framework, you have a part which is really about that, you know, looking at how the emissions go down through time compared to a baseline. As we get this information more and more from those jurisdictions, how do you integrate that into the framework? Because at the moment, you only have process kind of indicators.
Shall I start, or Mike, do you want to?
Again, I think it's a very, very good question. I think everything about the last 9 months would be about learning, a very different approach to how we run supply chains, particularly for a retailer getting involved with a commodity a long distance away from us. So making sure that we've got outputs that show just not processes being done, but actually there's benefits in terms of deforestation, there's benefits in terms of livelihoods and social benefits as well, is something that we need to solve. Again, very clearly, we don't want each individual retailer, each individual manufacturing brand developing their own methodology. We have to work in partnership to make sure there is one common approach. And again, it's very difficult for an individual company to be ensuring that it's part of sourcing from Indonesia or from Brazil or from Colombia is delivering a set number of jobs or a set number of trees that are still standing. So again, by working in partnerships like this, we can create a common methodology that we all use, and also methodology for a whole landscape, so we can ensure that collectively we're keeping those forests standing and making a difference for people as well.
And maybe just to add to that, as you dig into the questions that are there, you'll see that over time, as emissions reductions are monitored, they have to stay below the assessed baseline in order to maintain eligibility. Obviously, the FCPS methodological framework has a whole methodology for assessing that and verifying that. BCS does as well. So those are the two standards that have been recognized. If it was an individual program which were being assessed, you would look to see how you will know over time that they're monitoring against an assessed baseline and that those results are verified by a third party. So that's already built in.
All right, can we get a round of applause for an excellent panel here tonight? Some fascinating work on this combination between